Right, here we are, chapter 10, the last chapter. I just want to go over some of the most important elements of chapter 10 on forgiveness and reconciliation. Um, Forgiveness is a process that's begun by a choice, and that is the decision, the choice to forgive. It is sometimes an easy choice, and sometimes we all know it's not an easy choice. But it's one that we all have to make for ourselves, and that's the process of forgiveness. Obviously, it starts with that choice. Um, it is a decision to reduce negative feelings, negative thoughts, emotions, or behaviors towards another person um, or towards a situation that's harmful. Um, it's a decision to mitigate blame and anger and to work towards forgiveness, um, and a decision to begin better understanding the offense and the offender. And so it's a process of decisions, a set of decisions that begins that process, I guess is a better way of saying it. Some of the key elements of forgiveness focused on the present after deeply reflecting on the past. You have thought seriously about the past and what has happened, and now you have to decide what you want or what you don't want going forward. Um, a desire to be free of negative patterns that reduce the quality of your life. Forgiveness it's often said, forgiveness is for the person forgiving. And in some senses, that's true. It allows you to let go of some negativity sometimes. If you have a desire to be free of the patterns of negative emotions and behaviors that reduce the quality of your life, perhaps working towards forgiveness will help that happen. Um, Key element of forgiveness is to be willing to do your own work. To regardless of what other person is able or willing to do, you are willing to do your own interior work. To think about your role in the conflict. To think about your role in whatever act is being discussed in terms of forgiveness. Um, and finally, one of the key elements is developing compassion for yourself and for others, giving up the idea that you want to get even with someone else, which is going to allow you to live more freely and happily. It is a short term feeling of goodness when we get even. It may feel good, but it's not good for the long term relationship. So it's short term, it's a short term gain. And we have to be willing to let go of the desire to get even. Um, what forgiveness isn't is really important. I think sometimes forgiveness is something that we just all assume we all have the same definition of, and I'm not sure that's always the case. Um, and some people don't trust processes of forgiveness, but I think it's because they don't recognize these things. First of all, forgiving is not a dismissal or a minimization of anything that happened. Just because you forgive, you're not saying what happened wasn't important. You're not minimizing it. Um, it is not a way to excuse or condone behavior of others. It is forgiving that behavior. That doesn't mean that's not the same thing as condoning or saying that it's okay. Um, it is not an indifference to justice. Just because someone forgives, you think about something like the civil rights movement, all the forgiveness that had to happen to those people who were engaged in things like civil disobedience, um, they're not indifferent to justice. They're just not going to live, they didn't want to live with the negativity. And so they chose to forgive over and over and over again in their fight for civil rights. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. I think that especially is another thing that's very gendered in our culture, that men should never be weak. Um, First of all, that's not true. But second, like, forgiveness isn't weakness. Forgiveness is strength. Being able to take stock of everything and make a firm decision about how your life is going to move forward, there's nothing weak about that. Weakness is avoiding instead of forgiving. I'm not saying that avoiding is a weakness, right? I've already told you there are times when you should avoid conflicts. But um, being willing to engage in the forgiveness process is not weakness. It takes an enormous amount of strength. Um, Something that forgiveness isn't something we should offer for another without his or her their permission. So you don't get to offer forgiveness to somebody else for something they did to another person. That's not something you should do. Um, it isn't always necessary. Sometimes the refusal to forgive represents a commitment to the truth and a commitment that someone needs to be accountable. And so forgiveness doesn't always have to happen. It is not the same as reconciliation. I'll talk a little bit about reconciliation at the end. It is not a challenge to power imbalances. Um, it People with power can coerce forgiveness, and so is it really forgiveness if it's coerced? If not, then what is it? If your boss comes in and says, "I know I did a really bad thing. I need for you to forgive me," that's a coerced, and you're not in a position of power to say no. Often, that's not real forgiveness. Um, and forgiveness isn't something that we should require. We can't require it of others. We can't make people forgive us when we make mistakes, nor should we always require it of ourselves, regardless of the moral force attached to it. Um, Forgive and forget. That is a key phrase in our society. It has a large moral force, but there are times when you shouldn't forgive. There are times when you shouldn't forget, and you have to give yourself permission to make those choices. Um, can we forgive? We have some research on what sort of context really needs to exist before people can forgive. Um, People who have been hurt by other people's are more willing to renegotiate, to forgive, and to think differently about a relationship when three things have happened. First of all, there is essential agreement as to the nature of the violation. So you have said you did this wrong, and this person agrees, yes, I did this wrong. The other person has to acknowledge the pain and the hurt that their violation caused. If they do acknowledge that and you feel it's a sincere acknowledgement, forgiveness becomes more possible. And the offending person has to make an apology for the hurt and the pain that violation caused. And we're going to talk about apologies next. 76% of case studies showed the following communication from the offender influences a decision to forgive. So if you are somebody who has done something that needs forgiving in an interpersonal relationship, a work relationship, if you do these 5 things, you are 76% of the time, generally speaking, that other person's going to feel like they can forgive you. Directly explain what you did, what the offense was, what you did. Acknowledge responsibility for the choice that you made and the actions you took. Request that forgiveness. Tell them why it's important to you to be forgiven. To show actual remorse. Again, sincerity is very important. If someone doesn't perceive you as sincere, they're not going to be able to forgive you very easily. And apologize. And so, what are the limits of an apology? Apologies can create the illusion that something significant is happening or will be soon be made right. It is typically the first step in changes of behavior. I apologize. I will do better next time. Apologies, though, can be hollow. They can be a form of manipulation. They can put you under pressure to accept it. You could put someone else under pressure to accept it. And so you want to make sure that apologies are real, that you're not apologizing to manipulate someone else, and that someone's not apologizing to you to try and manipulate you and your emotions. Expedient apologies are often just a means to move on and not engage in the conflict. So, like immediately apologizing to avoid more controversy or discomfort. Let's move on. I apologize. Let's just move on. It's way easier to do that than to engage and have to listen to somebody talk to you about what you did and its impact on them. And so you want to be careful about apologies and not trying to make them expedient, not trying to make them quick, just so you can get to the end of the conversation is what expediency would be. Compelled apologies can be empty, they can lack depth, and they can ignore the full effect of a person's actions. If there's no time taken to understand the impact or the harm that someone's done, a compelled apology is pretty worthless. I mean, this is extreme is the wrong word. This is just an example from probably our own lives. If you had a sibling and your parents made you apologize for doing something and you weren't sorry, like your sibling knew you didn't mean it, right? But when you're kids, these things ring in our lives differently than when we're adults. And so compelled apologies can be empty, and you want to be mindful of that. Delayed apologies or apologies from a third party on their behalf can happen when someone removed from the event does the apologizing. You think about something like a president who comes out and says, I'm apologizing on behalf of my country for our role in slavery or our role in the Holocaust or whatever horror perhaps has happened. A third party who's far away from that can give an apology that can be meaningful to groups of people who have come after those particular events. Good apologies are going to acknowledge harm and not justify. You're going to avoid justifications. You're not going to make excuses or justify your behavior. You're just going to acknowledge the harm. You're going to accept rather than deflect responsibility. This is my fault. I did this. A good apology is going to communicate sincere regret and remorse. You are deeply sorry. You regret the feelings that you've caused, the harm that you have caused. They're going to offer some sort of reparation. I'd like to compensate you for this harm. What can I do to make things better? How can I take a situation I've made bad and make it better? Good apologies are going to assure safety for the sake of the future of the relationship. This will not happen again. I'll never make this mistake again. Good apologies reaffirm and clarify shared values so that both parties understand the terms of any future relationship. If you say, I know that taking responsibility is important to you, and so I'm going to take responsibility here, and that's going to be a cornerstone of our relationship, then that shared value is communicated, and someone will appreciate you linking that apology to a shared value. In rare cases, a good apology may require an explanation. If requested by the injured party, they might say, what were you thinking when you did X? And you have a responsibility to answer as best you can. That would be part of a good apology. And then lastly, reconciliation. Reconciliation is a process of repairing a relationship so that there's re-engagement, that there's trust, and cooperation becomes possible after a transgression or some sort of violation. Forgiveness can happen without reconciliation. You can forgive someone and then remove them from your life. These things don't have to both happen. You get to decide, especially in your interpersonal relationships, whether you want to forgive and not reconcile, or you do want to forgive and reconcile. That decision is something you get to make. Reconciliation rebuilds bridges between people. It focuses on truth, which is the ability to honor and acknowledge and communicate about what happened and its effects. It's about forbearance, the willingness of another party to forego punishment or revenge. It's about empathy, gaining feeling for the other person. It's rooted in the realization that the one that hurt us, despite that hurt, is a human being with perhaps terrible struggles of their own. Perhaps they grew up in a family where violence was the norm, and understanding that, again, doesn't mean you have to reconcile, but you can understand. And you can have empathy for someone who learned really bad relationship patterns and behaviors. And reconciliation is about commitment to the relationship and awareness of interdependence. Wanting to work things out because of a shared community membership and a mutual responsibility to work things out. And the best examples I can give you from my life, my experiences in reconciliation, and they're not direct experiences. But one experience in particular is one of my mentors, one of my political science professors as an undergrad. I was a political science major, and he taught my international relations course. He's now one of the directors of a peace institute, and he has done work for years in Colombia. Colombia is a place where warring factions, drug lords, cartels wreaked havoc on the entire country, forcing people to take sides, killing at will, rape, murder, torture, all the bad things, and horrific things. This person runs an institute that has worked very, very hard to help these cartels, these groups, find reconciliation, to work together, because that conflict was tearing their country apart, destroying their country. If you're interested in how all of this happened, there's a great documentary called Plan Colombia. It actually investigates the United States' role in everything that happened in this country and how it just disintegrated the country of Colombia in so many ways. But he works on reconciliation. He brings these parties together, and he tries to get them to engage in truth and forbearance and empathy and commitment to a shared responsibility of the country of Colombia. And it is astounding, brave, amazing work. And that is reconciliation on a large scale. But I think sometimes extreme examples can make these things a little more clear. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about reconciliation. We're talking about a person who's working to get warring cartels and gangs talking to each other, forgiving each other, refusing to continue retribution so that their country can rebuild. And so while that is a big example, it is a good example of what reconciliation does and what plays a role in it and how important it is. So that's it for the very final chapter. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.